The day the aliens came, Jake wasn't worried about the world ending. He was worried about the burnt toast. The smoke detector was screaming like a banshee, and his daughter Lily was fanning the black smoke away from it with a dish towel, her face a mask of teenage disgust. "Dad, seriously?" she coughed, waving the towel harder. "Again." Jake yanked the blackened slices from the toaster with a fork. "It's a finicky machine, you know that." "It's not the machine, Dad. It's you. You were staring out the viewport again." She was right, he had been. Staring out at the deep velvet blackness of space, sprinkled with the diamond dust of distant stars. Station Epsilon was a lonely place, a glorified truck stop on the interstellar highway. And sometimes the emptiness got to him. It had been 2 years since Sarah, his wife, had died. 2 years of raising a 15-year-old girl on his own, in a tin can 1 billion miles from anything that felt like home. The station's alert klaxon suddenly blared, a low, gut-rumbling hum that vibrated through the floor plates. It was a sound they rarely heard, not the fire alarm, not the depressurization warning. This was the unidentified contact alarm. Lily dropped the towel. "What's that?" "Stay here," Jake said, his heart starting a heavy, clumsy drumbeat against his ribs. He moved to the main viewport in their small living quarters. Outside, where there should have been only stars and the slow curve of a nearby gas giant, there was something else. It was a ship, but it was like no ship he had ever seen. It wasn't metal, not in the way he understood it. It looked like it was carved from polished obsidian, a long needle-like shape that absorbed the light around it, creating a patch of perfect, starless black. There were no windows, no engines, no markings. It just hung there, silent and impossible. Then the station shuddered. A deep, grinding clang echoed through the corridors. They were here. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through Jake. He grabbed Lily's arm. "Get in the pantry, now." "But Dad." "Now, Lily." His voice was a stranger's, rough and tight. She scrambled into the small supply closet without another word. Jake stood by the door, his hand trembling as he held a heavy mag wrench he'd been using to fix the sink. The station's internal lights flickered, died, then came back on at a dimmer emergency level. The silence that followed was worse than the alarm. A sound came from the corridor, a soft, rhythmic clicking. It wasn't the sound of boots on metal. It was something else. Something organic and hard, like giant insects walking on tile. The door to their quarters slid open. They were tall. Impossibly tall and thin, their limbs bending at angles that felt wrong. Their bodies were a pale, chitinous gray, like bone. They had no faces. Where a face should be, there was only a smooth, featureless surface that swirled with soft internal blue light. Jake's breath hitched in his throat. The mag wrench felt as useless as a toothpick. One of the creatures stepped forward. It didn't look at him. Its blank face tilted, scanning the small apartment. The blue light within its head brightened as it swiveled toward the pantry door. A voice, not from a mouth but from the air itself, filled the room. It was flat, calm, and perfectly clear, like an automated announcer. Analysis complete. Redundancy detected. The creature glided toward the pantry. Jake moved to block it, raising the wrench. "Get back, get away from there." The creature didn't even pause. An impossibly fast limb, thin as a reed and hard as steel, shot out and tapped the wrench. A jolt, like 1,000 volts of electricity, shot up Jake's arm. The wrench clattered to the floor, his muscles spasming. He fell to his knees, his arm numb and useless. The pantry door slid open. Lily was huddled in the back, her eyes wide with terror. She let out a small, choked cry. The alien pointed a long, slender finger at her. The voice spoke again. The same chilling, detached tone. This unit is a source of emotional inefficiency. Its attachment to the primary caregiver unit. Jake -734 reduces his operational output by 17%. The unit itself contributes no essential function to the station collective. It is suboptimal. It took Jake a moment to understand. Unit, caregiver, suboptimal. They were talking about his daughter like she was a faulty piece of machinery. "She's not a unit," Jake rasped, trying to get to his feet. "She's my daughter." The creature turned its blank face toward him. The blue light inside swirled. The concept of daughter is an illogical, resource-intensive emotional bond. It is a flaw in your species' programming. We are here to correct such flaws. Two of the creatures moved past him, their strange, clicking steps echoing in the small space. They reached for Lily. She screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure fear that ripped through Jake's paralysis. "No!" he roared, a primal sound torn from his soul. "Don't you touch her!" They ignored him. They took her arms, their grip gentle but firm. They began to lead her out of the pantry. Lily fought, kicking and struggling, but it was like fighting statues. Her eyes met Jake's. Daddy, help me." That single word, Daddy, a name she hadn't called him in years, broke something inside him. The universe narrowed to that one desperate plea. The burnt toast, the lonely station, the impossible aliens, none of it mattered. Only Lily. He scrambled forward, grabbing at one of the creature's legs. It felt like trying to tackle a steel pillar. The lead alien paused at the door, turning its faceless head. The voice echoed one last time, a statement of cold, simple fact that was more terrifying than any threat. "We are the Glycon. We are here to improve you. The process has begun." Then they were gone, taking Lily with them. The corridor was empty. The only sound was Jake's own ragged, sobbing breaths. In the sudden, crushing silence. For a long time, Jake just knelt there on the cold metal floor. The part of his brain that handled rational thought was gone, replaced by a roaring white noise of panic and disbelief. They had taken her. They had walked into his home and taken his daughter because she was suboptimal. The words echoed in his skull, nonsensical and monstrous. He finally staggered to his feet, his numb arm tingling with pins and needles. He stumbled into the corridor. It was empty. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows. Down the hall he could see other doors open. He heard a woman crying softly, a man shouting in anger. He wasn't the only one. He ran. He didn't know where he was going, just that he had to move. He sprinted toward the station's central hub, a large circular room with viewports looking out on all sides. Maybe someone was fighting back. Maybe security was doing something. The hub was chaos. People were clustered together, shouting, crying, staring at each other with wide, panicked eyes. But there was no fighting. Station security officers stood in a stunned line, their stun batons and plasma pistols still holstered. They looked as lost as everyone else. And in the center of the room stood one of the Glycons. It was perfectly still, its blank face surveying the scene. The blue light inside its head pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat. It wasn't threatening anyone. It was just re-observing. An officer, a burly man named Riggs, who Jake had shared a drink with once, stepped forward. "In the name of the Terran Confederacy," he said, his voice shaking but loud, "identify yourselves and release the citizens you have taken." The voice of the Glycon filled the hub, calm and dispassionate. "We are the Glycon. We have identified ourselves. The units taken are being relocated for processing. This is not a negotiation." "Processing?" Riggs demanded. "What does that mean? Where are you taking them?" "Your species shows potential," the Glycon stated, ignoring the question. "You have spread across this sector with remarkable speed, but you are inefficient. You are plagued by illogical emotional attachments that hinder your progress. Grief, irrational affection, familial bonds that cause you to expend resources on non-productive individuals." A woman near Jake sobbed, "They took my boy, he's only 6. The Glycon's head turned slightly in her direction. "The unit you refer to was identified as a future resource drain. His genetic markers indicated a high probability of congenital illness. His removal increases the overall efficiency of the station's human collective." The cold, brutal logic of it was like a physical blow. They weren't conquerors. They were cosmic gardeners, pruning what they saw as weeds. And their definition of a weed was a child who might get sick, or a daughter whose father loved her too much. Jake felt a surge of rage so pure and hot it burned away his fear. He pushed through the crowd until he was standing in front of Riggs, facing the alien. "You are talking about people," Jake spat, his voice raw. "My daughter. Her name is Lily. She's not a unit." The Glycon's light-filled head focused on him. "The designation Lily is irrelevant. The emotional bond you feel is a biological flaw. It causes you to make poor decisions. You prioritize one suboptimal individual over the health of the collective. This is a weakness we will help you overcome." "It's not a weakness," Jake said, his fists clenched. "It's called love, you freak. Love." The Glycon's voice repeated the word as if tasting it. "An electrochemical reaction in your primitive brain designed to ensure procreation. It has outlived its usefulness. It creates inefficiencies. We have observed your species for many cycles. We have seen you sacrifice entire missions for a single crew member. We have seen you wage wars over perceived insults to family honor. It is illogical. It must be corrected." Riggs finally drew his plasma pistol. The whine of it charging filled the room. "I am giving you one last chance. Let them go." The Glycon did not move. "Your weapon is a primitive energy tool. It cannot harm us. Your aggression is another symptom of your core inefficiency. It is predictable." Riggs fired. A bolt of blue-white energy shot across the room and hit the Glycon square in the chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the energy seemed to be absorbed. It flowed over the alien's chitinous skin and was drawn into the swirling blue light in its head, which glowed brighter for a second before returning to normal. "Your energy output is insufficient," the Glycon said. "Thank you for the demonstration." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Hope died in that moment, replaced by a chilling absolute dread. They were helpless. These things were untouchable. Jake's mind raced. He couldn't fight them. He couldn't reason with them. They saw the very thing that made him human as a disease to be cured. And they had his daughter. They were going to process her. He didn't know what that meant, but the clinical coldness of the word made his blood run cold. He had to get her back. If he couldn't fight them with force, he had to be smarter or sneakier. This station was his home. He knew its guts. The maintenance shafts, the power conduits, the forgotten storage bays that weren't on any official map. While the Glycon was educating the terrified crowd, Jake began to back away, melting into the shadows at the edge of the hub. He had no plan. He only had a single, burning thought. They thought his love for Lily was a weakness. He was going to show them just how strong that weakness could be. The corridors of Station Epsilon had become a haunted house. The normal, reassuring hum of the life support system was now a low moan, in the background of a terrifying silence. People huddled in their quarters, too scared to come out. The Glycons moved through the station with a silent, purposeful grace, their clicking footsteps a harbinger of cold, logical doom. Jake didn't go back to his apartment. It was the first place they would look if they realized he was gone. Instead, he went down into the belly of the station to Deck 4, the engineering and maintenance level. It was a place of tangled pipes, humming generators, and the constant smell of ozone and recycled oil. It was a place most residents never saw. It was Jake's old stomping ground. He'd worked as a junior maintenance tech for his first 3 years on Epsilon, before getting a promotion to cargo logistics. He knew these tunnels. He knew the shortcuts, the dead ends, and the hidden access panels. He found what he was looking for behind a large coolant pump. A small, rectangular panel marked J-17. He pulled at the recessed handle. It was stiff with disuse. He grunted, pulling with all his weight, and it finally screeched open, revealing a dark, narrow shaft, the maintenance crawl space. A network of tunnels that spiderwebbed throughout the entire station, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. He squeezed inside, pulling the panel shut behind him. The darkness was absolute. The air was thick with dust and a metallic tang of old wiring. He switched on the small work light on his wrist comm. The narrow beam cut a small circle in the oppressive dark, revealing insulated pipes and thick bundles of data cables running along the walls. He had to find where they were keeping the children. His heart hammered against his ribs. Lily. He pictured her face, her terrified eyes. That image was a fire in his gut, pushing him forward. He crawled on his hands and knees, the rough grating scraping his skin. He moved toward the aft section of the station, where the main docking bay and cargo holds were. It seemed the most logical place to hold prisoners. The Glycon ship was docked there. After what felt like an hour of crawling, he found a vent that looked down into Cargo Bay 3. He pressed his face to the grate, peering into the cavernous space below. And he saw them. The children. There were about a dozen of them, including Lily. They were huddled together in the center of the bay, under the cold white glare of the work lights. They weren't in cages, they were just... Standing there, a single Glycon stood guard, its back to Jake's position, perfectly still. It was like a shepherd watching a flock of very frightened sheep. Lily was there. He saw her dark hair, the worn patch on the knee of her jeans. She was holding the hand of the little 6-year-old boy whose mother had been crying in the hub. Relief washed over Jake so powerfully his knees went weak. She was alive. She was unharmed. But for how long? He watched as another Glycon glided into the bay from the direction of their ship. It held a small metallic device. It approached one of the older children, a teenage boy Jake recognized from the level above. The Glycon raised the device to the boy's temple. The boy flinched, but was too scared to run. There was a soft hum, and the boy's eyes went wide, then unfocused. He slumped to the floor, not unconscious, but blank, docile. His expression was empty. They were processing them, wiping away whatever it was that made them individuals. Whatever made them love or fear or hope. They were turning them into living machines. Jake felt sick. He had to do something right now. He looked around the crawl space. His light fell on a large red lever on the wall next to him, labeled Emergency Fire Suppression, Cargo Bay 3. It was a halon gas system, old but effective. It wouldn't hurt the kids, but it would create chaos. A thick, non-toxic cloud would fill the bay, obscuring vision. It was his only chance. He took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. This was insane, but the image of that boy's empty eyes was burned into his mind. He would not let that happen to Lily. He grabbed the lever with both hands and pulled down with all his might. An alarm blared in the cargo bay below. Red lights began to flash. Vents in the ceiling hissed open, and thick white gas began to pour into the room. The children cried out in alarm. The glycans turned, their blank faces swiveling, to locate the source of the disruption. The bay filled with the white cloud with astonishing speed. Jake could no longer see the floor clearly. He scrambled back to the access panel he had entered through, wrenched it open, and dropped into the maintenance corridor of Deck 4. He ran, his boots clanging on the metal walkway. He found a ladder leading up to Deck 3 and climbed, his lungs burning. He emerged into a service corridor, just a short sprint from the cargo bay's main entrance. He burst through the door. The bay was a swirling vortex of white gas. He could hear the children coughing and crying. "Lily," he yelled, his voice hoarse. "Lily, it's me, Dad." He plunged into the fog, blind. He bumped into something tall and hard, a glycon. He recoiled, stumbling backward. He couldn't see it, but he could feel its presence, a cold spot in the chaos. "Lily, over here," he shouted again, desperation making his voice crack. Then he heard it, a faint voice cutting through the noise. "Dad." "I am here. Keep talking," he yelled, moving toward the sound. "Dad." Her voice was closer now. He pushed forward, and suddenly she was there, slamming into his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. "I've got you. I've got you." He felt a hand grab his arm. It wasn't Lily's. It was small and trembling. The little 6-year-old boy. Jake grabbed his hand without a second thought. "Stay with us," he said. "This way," he shouted, hoping other kids would hear. He turned and ran back toward the door, pulling Lily and the boy with him. They burst out of the gas-filled bay and into the corridor, just as 2 more glycans were gliding toward the entrance. They saw him. Their faceless heads snapped in his direction. There was no time to think. Jake shoved Lily and the boy toward a side corridor. "Run, don't stop." He turned to face the aliens, his only thought to buy the children a few seconds. He had no weapon. He was just a man in their way. And he knew, with a sudden, terrible certainty, it wasn't going to be enough. The glycans didn't rush him. They glided forward with that same unhurried, terrifying confidence. Jake backed away down the corridor, his heart trying to hammer its way out of his chest. He could hear the fading footsteps of Lily and the little boy, which was the only thing keeping him on his feet. "Your actions are illogical," the voice of the glycon echoed in the narrow space. "You have compromised your own safety for 2 suboptimal units. This reinforces our assessment. Go to hell, Jake gasped, his back hitting the cold metal wall at the end of the corridor. It was a dead end. He was trapped. One of the Glycans raised a long, thin arm. Jake flinched, expecting the same electric jolt as before, but it didn't come. Instead, the station's systems around him began to go haywire. Lights flickered and died, plunging the corridor into near darkness, lit only by the eerie blue glow from the Glycans' heads. A heavy blast door at the far end of the corridor began to slide shut with a low, grinding groan, sealing off the escape route Lily had taken. They weren't just soldiers, they were hackers. They were hackers, they were inside the station's computer systems, bending it to their will. Jake was in the dark, trapped with two of them. He could hear their soft, clicking steps getting closer. He pressed himself against the wall, trying to make himself smaller. He was a mouse in a shoebox with two spiders. He had to do something, anything. His hand, scrabbling against the wall in the dark, brushed against a maintenance panel. He fumbled with the latch, his fingers clumsy with fear. It swung open. He felt inside, his hand closing around a thick, insulated power cable. It was one of the main conduits for this sector. An idea, born of pure desperation, sparked in his mind. He yanked on the cable with all his strength. It was heavy and stiff, but years of working in maintenance had taught him where the weak points were. He found a junction box and pulled, putting his back into it. Metal screamed in protest. There was a bright flash of sparks, a loud crackle of arcing electricity, and the Glycan's blue light, along with all the other emergency lights in the sector, went out. Total absolute darkness and silence. He'd blown the power for the whole sector. He didn't wait. He dropped to the floor and scrambled blindly away from where he'd last seen the aliens. The Glycans might be able to see in the dark, for all he knew, but the power surge might have momentarily confused their control over the station systems. It was a slim chance, but it was all he had. His hand hit a wall. He followed it, moving as quickly and quietly as he could. He could hear nothing. Had it worked? Had they lost him? Then he heard it. The soft click, click, click. It was behind him and it was getting closer. They could see in the dark. Of course they could. Panic seized him. He broke into a blind run, his hands out in front of him. He collided with a wall, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He turned and ran in another direction. The clicking followed, steady, relentless. They weren't running. They didn't need to. They were herding him. He was going to die here, in the dark, in a forgotten service corridor. And Lily would be alone. They would find her and the boy. They would take them back. They would finish the processing. Unemda. That one word was a shield. He would not let that happen. He stopped running. He stood perfectly still, his back against a cold pipe straining his ears. The clicking stopped too. The silence was worse. They were playing with him. Think, Jake, think. What do they not understand? They don't understand emotion. They don't understand irrationality. What is the most irrational thing I can do right now? He thought about the fire suppression system. Chaos. Disruption. He needed to create another disruption, something they wouldn't expect. He remembered a schematic of this sector. The main waste reclamation pipe ran through here. A large pressurized tube that carried all the station's refuse to the incinerator. If he could rupture that. He moved slowly along the wall, his hands feeling for the pipe. He found it. It was wide and cool to the touch. He followed it until he found a manual release valve. a big wheel used for emergency venting. It was probably rusted shut. He put both hands on the wheel and pushed. It didn't budge. He repositioned his feet, gritting his teeth, and threw his entire body weight into it. A groan of protesting metal. It moved, just a fraction of an inch. The clicking started again, faster this time. They knew he was doing something. He ignored them. He focused all his energy, all his fear and rage and love for Lily, into that one single motion. He pushed again. The wheel turned. A loud hiss came from the pipe. He gave it one last desperate shove. The valve gave way with a loud crack. There was a deafening roar as highly pressurized, half-recycled air and debris exploded from the pipe. The force of it threw Jake across the corridor. He hit the opposite wall hard, his head connecting with a sickening thud. The last thing he saw before his vision tunneled to black was a chaotic whirlwind of debris and gas filling the corridor, and the two glucons, momentarily thrown back by the unexpected, illogical, and very messy blast. Jake woke to a gentle shaking. His head felt like a cracked bell, a dull, throbbing ache radiating from the back of his skull. The air smelled foul, a mixture of stale air and garbage. "Get up. Come on, you idiot. Get up." The voice was rough, female and familiar. He forced his eyes open. A beam of light from a handheld work lamp blinded him. He groaned and tried to sit up. A strong hand grabbed his arm and hauled him to his feet. He swayed, the corridor tilting around him. "Maria," he mumbled. Maria Flores stood in front of him, her weathered face set in its usual scowl. She was the station's chief engineer, a woman who seemed to be held together by caffeine, grease, and pure stubbornness. She was also the closest thing Jake had to a friend on this rock. "What were you thinking? Picking a fight with them?" she grumbled, shining the light down the corridor. The glycans were gone. The air was still hazy with dust and floating bits of trash from the ruptured pipe. "You are lucky you didn't get yourself killed. Or worse." "Lily?" Jake said, his head clearing a little. "They have Lily?" "I got her out, but—" "I know," Maria said, her voice softening slightly. "I saw them on the security feed before the whole system went nuts. A girl and a little boy. That was you." Jake nodded, leaning against the wall for support. "Where are they? Are they safe?" "For now," Maria said. She handed him a water pouch. "I found them hiding in a supply closet 2 corridors over." The kid was terrified. "Your daughter, she's got some steel in her. She wouldn't leave him." The relief was so immense Jake felt like he might collapse. "Where did you take them?" "Someplace safe. Someplace not on any official station map," Maria said, her scowl returning. "And that's where we're going now. Come on. We don't have much time. They'll have the power back on soon." She led him through the dark, debris-strewn corridors, her work lamp cutting a path. She moved with a purpose Jake lacked, a knowledge of the station's hidden ways that surpassed even his own. She stopped at a blank section of wall, ran her hand over it, and pressed a small, almost invisible stud. A section of the wall hissed open, revealing a dark space beyond. "Old constructor's access," she said. "Sealed off after the station was built. I reopened a few of them. For emergencies." "I'd say this qualifies," Jake said, following her in. The hidden passage led them to a small, forgotten control room. It was dusty and smelled of old electronics, but the lights were on, powered by an independent battery system. And in the center of the room, huddled under a thermal blanket, were Lily and the little boy, whose name he learned was Sam. "Dad!" Lily jumped up and ran to him, burying her face in his chest. He held her, his eyes closing. The throbbing in his head didn't matter. Nothing mattered but the feeling of her safe in his arms. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I know. Me too," he said, stroking her hair. "Are you okay?" She pulled back, her eyes shining with tears, but also with a fierce determination he'd never seen before. They were doing something to the others, making them empty. "We have to help them, Dad." Jake looked at Maria. Her usual cynical mask was gone. In its place was a weary resolve. "They took my nephew," she said quietly. "My sister's boy, Tomas. He was visiting for the month. They said his focus on play was an inefficient use of developmental time." The words hung in the air, cold and absurd. Suddenly, Jake wasn't alone in his fight. Maria wasn't just helping him. This was her fight too. "What do we do?" Jake asked, his voice low. "We can't fight them, Maria. You saw what they did to Riggs's plasma shot. They're immune to our weapons. They control the station's systems." "So we don't fight them on their terms," Maria said, walking over to a dusty old console. She blew a layer of dust off it and began tapping at the keys. Ancient code scrolled across the screen. "We fight them on ours." "What does that mean?" Lily asked. Maria looked up, a grim smile on her face. "These things are all about logic, right? Efficiency, data. They think emotion is a bug in our system. But what if it's not a bug? What if it's a feature?" She pointed to the screen. "This is an old diagnostic port, completely isolated from the main network. The Gleekans are smart, but they're looking at the new systems. They might have overlooked this. If I can get a tap into their local communications, I might be able to see how they think, find a weakness." "A weakness in their logic?" Jake asked. "Exactly," Maria said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Every perfect system has a flaw. Every piece of code has a potential crash state. They think we're illogical. Let's see how their perfect logic handles a real dose of human insanity." Jake looked at his daughter, then at the little boy she had refused to leave behind. He looked at Maria, a woman driven by the same protective fury that was fueling him. They were a tiny, desperate alliance against an unbeatable foe. A maintenance worker, an engineer, a teenage girl, and a 6-year-old boy. It was completely, utterly irrational. And for the first time since the Gleekans arrived, Jake felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear. It was hope. The forgotten control room became their sanctuary and their war room. Sam, the little boy, eventually fell asleep under the thermal blanket, exhausted by fear. Jake sat with Lily, his arm around her, while Maria worked her magic on the ancient computer console. For hours, the only sounds were the soft tapping of keys and the hum of the old machine. The screen was a waterfall of alien data, a language of light and geometric patterns that was utterly incomprehensible. "It's like nothing I've ever seen," Maria muttered. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. "It's not code, in the way we think of it. It's more like a living mathematical equation. It's beautiful in a terrifying way." "Can you understand any of it?" Jake asked. "I am not trying to understand it," Maria said. "I'm trying to see its structure, its rules. They're a collective intelligence, a hive mind. Here is no I in their communications. It's all we. Every decision is a consensus based on probability and resource management." She pointed to a pulsing string of symbols on the screen. This sequence keeps repeating. It's their core directive. Increase efficiency. Eliminate deviation. Improve host species. Improve us by taking our kids and erasing their minds, Jake said bitterly. To them, it's not erasure, Maria countered, not looking up from the screen. It's optimization. They see personality, love, grief. They see it all as messy data, noise that corrupts the signal. They're trying to clean up our hard drive. Lily, who had been listening intently, spoke up. So they're not evil? They actually think they're helping? The question hung in the air. It was a disturbing thought. It was easier to fight a monster that wanted to destroy you. How do you fight a monster that wants to save you from yourself? In the worst possible way. Evil is a point of view, kid, Maria said. From their perspective, we're self-destructive, emotional wrecks, who are a danger to ourselves. They're the doctors, and we're the patients refusing a life-saving but painful surgery. Jake remembered the glycon's voice in the hub, the way it spoke of love as a biological flaw. They weren't just physically alien. Their minds, their very concept of existence was on a different plane. How could they possibly understand why he would risk everything for Lily? To them, it was like a man setting his own house on fire to save a favorite photograph. An act of pure, pointless madness. Okay, Jake said, standing up and pacing the small room. So their strength is their collective logic. Everything has to make sense. Everything has to be efficient. Exactly, Maria said. Look at this. She isolated another section of the data stream. This is their analysis of your little stunt with the fire suppression system. They classified it as chaotic, but predictable. They analyzed the probability of a panicked parent, creating a diversion. It was within their expected parameters. And the waste pipe? Jake asked. That one, Maria said with a hint of admiration, threw them for a loop. The probability of a subject willingly exposing themselves to a biohazard in a non-critical corridor was extremely low. It caused let's call it a hiccup in their consensus. A brief moment of logical reassessment. A spark ignited in Jake's mind. A hiccup. Because it didn't make sense. It wasn't an efficient way to escape, Maria agreed. It was messy, damaging to station property, and put you at high risk for a low probability reward. But, Lily said, yes, Jake said, stopping his pacing. He looked at Maria. It worked because it was a stupid idea. Maria finally looked away from the screen, a slow smile spreading across her face. She understood. It was an irrational choice, driven by desperation, by emotion. Their whole strategy is based on predicting our behavior. Jake continued, the plan starting to form in his mind, wild and terrifying. They expect us to hide, to fight with weapons, to run. They expect us to try and save ourselves. They've calculated all the logical moves. So we have to do something illogical, Lily finished, her eyes wide. Something they could never predict. Something so inefficient, so self-destructive that it breaks their equation, Maria added, her voice low and intense. What's the most valuable, most critical, most important system on this entire station? Jake asked, his heart beginning to pound with the audacity of his own idea. Maria's smile vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror and understanding. The core, she whispered, the fusion reactor. Destroying the reactor is the single most inefficient action anyone could take, Jake said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It destroys them. It destroys the... It serves no logical purpose for survival. It's a move that only makes sense if you have something you are willing to die for. They'll never see it coming, Maria breathed. We don't actually have to do it, Jake clarified quickly, seeing the fear in Lily's eyes. We just have to make them believe we will. We have to push their logic to the breaking point. We have to show them a variable they can't compute. He looked at his daughter, at the sleeping boy, at the determined engineer. They think family is a weakness, a flaw. We're going to show them that it's the most powerful, most irrational, and most dangerous thing in the universe. The room was silent. The plan was insane. It was a bluff on a cosmic scale with their lives as the ante, but it was the only plan they had. It was their one, illogical shot at showing the Glickens what it truly meant to be human. The plan was simple in its insanity. Maria would use her knowledge of the station's old systems to create a backdoor into the reactor's control room. Jake and Lily would have to make it there. Once inside, they would initiate a full reactor core overload sequence. It was a process that, once started, could only be stopped from that specific control panel, the ultimate dead man's switch. The overload sequence takes 10 minutes, Maria explained, her face illuminated by the green glow of the console. It's a safety protocol, to give people time to evacuate. Once we start it, every alarm on this station will go off. The Glickens will know instantly what's happening and where we are. They will come for us. They'll try to reason with us, Jake said. They'll tell us it's illogical. And we have to be convincing, Lily added, her voice steady. She was no longer just a scared kid. The last few hours had forged something new in her. They have to believe we'll go through with it. Here is a problem, Maria said, pointing to a schematic on the screen. The reactor control room is on deck 1, right next to the command hub. It's the most secure part of the station. And right now, it's crawling with those things. We'll never make it through the main corridors. So we don't use the main corridors, Jake said. He pointed to a different part of the schematic. The primary coolant lines. They run directly from the engineering deck up to the reactor housing. They're big enough to crawl through. It's a straight shot. Maria zoomed in on the schematics. The lines are active. They're filled with supercooled fluid. We'd freeze to death in seconds. Unless you can shut them down, Jake countered. Just for a few minutes, reroute the flow to the secondary system. Maria chewed on her lip, thinking. I could. It would trigger a dozen warning alarms, but the Glickens are probably ignoring routine maintenance alerts right now. The problem is, I'd have to do it from here. Once you are inside, I can't turn them back on until you open the line from the other side. If you get stuck, if you don't make it. We'll make it, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. The first step was getting Sam, the little boy, somewhere safer. They couldn't take him with them. Maria knew of a small, sealed-off hydroponics bay that had been abandoned years ago. It had its own air and water recycler. It was a long shot, but it was better than leaving him in the control room. Lily was the one who spoke to him. She knelt down and looked the sleepy boy in the eyes. Sam, we have to go play a game of hide and seek, the best game ever. You have to hide in a special secret garden and be very, very quiet until we come and get you. Can you do that? The boy nodded, his eyes wide. Lily gave him her own thermal blanket and a nutrient paste packet. Leaving him there alone in the dark was one of the hardest things Jake had ever had to do. It felt like they were abandoning him, but it was his only chance. Then it was time. Maria stood at her console, her hands poised over the keys. Okay, I am rerouting the coolant flow now. You'll have exactly 15 minutes before the system automatically tries to correct itself and floods the pipe. Go. An alarm, low and distant, began to sound somewhere deep in the station. Jake and Lily ran. They moved through the service corridors back to the main engineering deck. Jake pried open a heavy access grate on a massive pipe, wide enough for them to crawl into on their hands and knees. The inside was cold, a deep penetrating cold that seemed to suck the warmth right out of their bodies. The metal was coated in a thin layer of frost. "Stay close," Jake said, his voice echoing strangely in the tube. He switched on his wrist light and they began to crawl upwards into the dark. The pipe was a perfect dark cylinder. It was like crawling into the barrel of a giant's gun. The cold was brutal, seeping through their clothes, making their muscles ache. Jake could hear Lily's teeth chattering behind him. Almost there, he lied, trying to keep her going. They were a few hundred yards in when Jake heard it. A faint, rhythmic scraping sound from up ahead. It wasn't them. It was something else. He stopped, holding up a hand to signal Lily to be quiet. He turned his head, straining to listen. Scrape, click, scrape. It was coming from inside the pipe, coming toward them. His blood ran cold. He thought the pipe was their secret, their one safe path. He was wrong. A shape began to resolve itself in the darkness, beyond the reach of his small light. It was long and thin, and moving with that same unnatural, multi-jointed grace. A glycon. It was crawling down the pipe toward them. It must have detected the coolant shutdown and come to investigate the anomaly. They were trapped. There was no room to turn around, no room to fight. There was only the creature in front of them, and a long, cold crawl back the way they came. The glycon filled the entire tunnel. There was no getting past it. The blue light from its featureless head began to grow brighter, illuminating them in its eerie glow. The glycon in the pipe didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its presence was a statement. You are found. There is no escape. Jake's mind went blank with terror. It was over. All their planning, all their hope, was about to be extinguished in a cold, dark tube. He could feel Lily trembling behind him. Her fear was a current running through him, and it sparked something other than panic. Rage. He wasn't going to die cowering in a pipe. "Get back," he hissed to Lily. "Crawl back as fast as you can." "What are you going to do?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "I am going to create a distraction," he said. It was a weak plan, but it was the only one he had. He faced the approaching creature. The blue light from its head was hypnotic, chilling. It was close now, maybe 20 feet away. He had no weapon except for the tool on his belt, a heavy spanner wrench he'd picked up in engineering. It was a pathetic weapon against such a creature, but it was something. He pulled it free. The glycon paused, its head tilting slightly as if analyzing this new development. The disembodied voice filled the pipe, seeming to come from the walls themselves. "The tool is ineffective. Your resistance is illogical. The probability of your success is 0. You guys really need to learn some new words." Jake grunted, his knuckles white on the handle of the wrench. He knew he couldn't hurt it, not really, but he didn't have to. He just had to be irrational. He looked at the walls of the pipe. He looked at the wrench in his hand. He did the last thing the glycon would expect. He didn't attack it, he attacked the pipe. With a desperate roar, he swung the heavy wrench against the side of the coolant tube. The clang was deafening in the enclosed space. It was a thick, reinforced pipe, but he put every ounce of his strength into the blow. A small dent appeared on the metal surface. He hit it again and again. The sound was ear-splitting. Clang, clang, clang. Clang, clang. The Glycon stopped its advance. The light in its head pulsed faster. Cease this action. You risk compromising the integrity of the primary coolant system. This is a Class A critical failure event. I know, Jake yelled, swinging again. A small crack appeared next to the dent. A tiny, almost invisible wisp of vapor escaped with a faint hiss. Supercooled gas. This was it. The ultimate act of inefficiency. Damaging the very system he was using for transport. It made no sense. The Glycon started to move forward again. Faster this time. It couldn't allow this to happen. The logic of its programming dictated that it must preserve the station's core functions. Jake ignored it. He focused on the crack. Hitting it again and again, the crack widened. The hissing grew louder. The cold intensified. The Glycon was almost on him. A long, spindly limb reached for him. Jake gave the pipe one last desperate blow. The metal gave way. With a loud tearing sound, a hairline fracture shot up the pipe. A jet of freezing cold fluid and gas erupted from the rupture. It wasn't a flood, not yet, but it was a violent, powerful spray. The spray hit the Glycon directly in its path. The creature recoiled. It had no face to show pain or shock, but its movements became jerky, confused. The super-cold fluid was doing something to its body, something its physiology was not prepared for. Frost began to form instantly on its pale, chitinous skin. The blue light in its head flickered violently, like a dying light bulb. It was working. It was so cold, so extreme it was affecting the alien's biology. Jake didn't wait to see what would happen next. "Go!" he screamed back at Lily. He turned and scrambled backward, away from the hissing rupture and the freezing, faltering creature. He crawled as fast as he could, the metal scraping his hands and knees raw. He finally reached Lily, who had been watching in horrified awe. "Come on," he urged. They crawled together, moving away from the chaos. Behind them, the sounds of the hissing jet and the strange struggling clicks of the Glycon faded. They had bought themselves time. They reached the end of the pipe, a vertical shaft that led up to deck 1. Jake pushed open the access hatch and they tumbled out into a small service junction, gasping for air, their bodies aching with a deep chilling cold. They were covered in frost. They were there. According to Maria's map, the reactor control room was just down one short corridor. But their time was running out. Every alarm on the station was wailing now, a symphony of disaster. The ruptured coolant pipe, the rerouted flow, it was all screaming for attention. The Glycons would be coming. All of them. They ran down the last corridor. They saw the door at the end, labeled Urastor Control. They were almost there. Then the door to the command hub slid open, and 2 more Glycons stepped out, blocking their path. They had been waiting. They had predicted their destination. This time there were no pipes to break, no tricks to play. It was an open corridor. Jake and Lily skidded to a halt. They were trapped with their goal just feet away. The 2 Glycons in the corridor stood like sentinels, their faceless heads turned toward Jake and Lily. The emergency lights bathed the scene in a pulsing red glow. The station's alarms were a constant screaming wail. "It is over," the familiar disembodied voice said. It came from both of them at once. A chorus of cold logic. "Your path is blocked. Your attempt to reach the reactor is predicted and contained. Surrender the unit, Lily. Your continued resistance is futile and inefficient. Jake pushed Lily behind him. His heart was a frantic bird beating against his ribs. They were so close. No, Jake said, his voice surprisingly steady. We're not surrendering anyone. Your parental attachment is a malfunction, the voice continued, its tone unchanging. A data error. It compels you to irrational, self-destructive behavior. We can correct this. We can remove the grief you feel for your deceased mate. We can edit the inefficient bond to your offspring. We can make you a more productive member of the collective. The offer was obscene. They wanted to strip away his love for Sarah, his love for Lily, and call it an upgrade. They wanted to hollow him out and call it a cure. In that moment, Jake understood. This wasn't just about saving Lily's life. It was about defending the very thing they called a flaw.
You don't get it,
Jake said, taking a step forward. That malfunction is all I have left. It's the best part of me. It's the best part of us. He looked back at Lily. Her face was pale with fear, but she nodded at him. A silent message of trust, of love. He turned back to the Gleekans. You think you've won. You think you've figured us out. But you've missed the most important variable in your whole damn equation. He looked past the Gleekans at the reactor control room door. And then he looked at the ceiling, at the heavy fire suppression sprinkler system. Lily, he said, not taking his eyes off the aliens. The wrench, throw it. What? She asked, confused. Just do it. At the sprinkler head above them. Without hesitating, she did. She took the heavy spanner wrench from her belt and threw it with all her might. It wasn't a good throw, clumsy and wobbling, but it was enough. The wrench spun through the air and struck the large red sprinkler head on the ceiling, right above the two Gleekans. It shattered. Water, not halon gas, poured down, a deluge of cold recycled water drenching the two aliens. For a second, nothing happened. The Gleekans just stood there, water sheeting off their gray bodies. Then they began to twitch. Their limbs jerked in sporadic, uncontrolled movements. The blue light in their heads flickered wildly, shifting to a staticky red, then green, then back to blue. It was the same thing that had happened in the pipe, but worse. Their systems weren't just being affected by extreme cold. The water, combined with their internal energy systems, was short-circuiting them. One of them let out a sound, not the calm, automated voice, but a screech of static and electronic feedback, a horrible grinding noise that scraped at the ears. It stumbled backward, its legs bending at impossible angles. The other one collapsed, falling to the floor in a shower of sparks, its limbs twitching. Jake didn't wait. He grabbed Lily's hand. Now! They sprinted past the flailing, short-circuiting creatures. They reached the reactor control room door. Maria had done her work. The lock was overridden. Jake slammed the palm of his hand on the access panel, and the door slid open. They stumbled inside. The room was a small, circular chamber, dominated by a single large console under a dome of reinforced plasteel, the heart of the station. Jake slammed the emergency lock button. A series of heavy bolts shot into place, sealing them in. They were safe for the moment. He ran to the console. A large, red-covered button was at its center, labeled Manual Core Overload. This was it, the bluff. He looked at Lily. She stood by the door, watching the corridor through the small, thick viewport. More Glycans were arriving. They were gathering outside, their blue lights illuminating the hallway. They weren't trying to break down the door. They were just watching, waiting. "They're waiting to see what we do," she said. Jake took a deep breath. His hand hovered over the button. "Maria," he said into his wristcom, "are you there? We're in." "I see you, Jake." Her voice came back tinny and laced with static. "They know. The whole hive knows. They're watching you." "Good," Jake said. "Let them watch." He flipped open the protective cover on the overload button. His finger rested on the button itself. All he had to do was push. A new voice filled the control room, not from the command but from the room's own speakers. It was the Glycon Collective. Clear, calm, final. Jake -734. Your action will result in the termination of 487 human lives, the destruction of a class -4 station, and your own cessation. The life of one suboptimal unit, Lily -821, does not justify this outcome. This is the ultimate expression of inefficiency. Stop now. This is your final chance to be logical. Jake looked at his daughter. Her terrified, brave face. He thought of his wife, Sarah, and the promise he'd made to always protect their child. He thought of what the Glycans wanted to do to her, to all of them. To scour them of the very things that made life worth living. He pressed his thumb down firmly on the button. A new alarm, louder and more final than all the others, began to blare. A synthesized voice echoed through the station. "Warning, reactor core overload initiated. Meltdown in 10 minutes." He looked through the viewport at the Glycans gathered outside. "She's not a unit," Jake said, his voice a low, fierce whisper meant for them and them alone. "She's my daughter, and if you don't understand what that means, then you don't understand anything at all." He held his thumb on the button, his knuckles white. The countdown had begun. The countdown clock on the main screen began to tick down. 9:59, 9:58. Each second was a hammer blow in the sudden silence of the control room. The alarms outside still wailed, but in their small sanctuary, there was only the soft hum of the console and the frantic beating of Jake's heart. Lily came and stood beside him, her small hand finding his free one. She didn't say anything. She just squeezed his hand, her gaze fixed on the Glycans outside the viewport. The aliens weren't moving. They were perfectly still. A silent assembly of faceless judges, the blue light in their heads, which had always been a steady, calm glow, was now flickering erratically across the entire group. It was like watching a network of computers, all trying to solve an impossible problem at once. 8:45, 8:44. "What are they doing?" Lily whispered. "Thinking," Jake said, his throat dry. "Or whatever it is they do. We just gave them a math problem with no right answer." From a Glycon's perspective, Jake's action was pure madness. There was no scenario in which destroying the station was a positive outcome. It didn't save him. It didn't save his daughter. It was an act of ultimate spiteful self-destruction. It was a variable that their logic, their entire philosophy of efficient survival, could not process. Love, in its most extreme and protective form, was a denial of logic. It was a value that superseded survival itself. 7:30, 7:29. The light in the head of the lead Glycon, standing right in front of the viewport, began to change. The blue faded, replaced by a swirling, chaotic pattern of red and white static. It was the visual representation of a system crash. The being took a stumbling step backward. Then the voice came through the speakers again. But it was different. It wasn't the calm, unified chorus. It was fragmented, broken. Data, conflict, the value of a single unit cannot exceed the value of the collective. This action is not possible. It is possible, Jake said to the viewport, his voice resonating with a strength he didn't know he had. You just don't have a word for it. You don't have a number for it. 6:15, 6:14. The glycon in front of them shuddered. A low-frequency hum emanated from its body, a sound of deep structural stress. It slowly raised one of its thin arms and pointed, not at Jake, but at Lily. The voice spoke again, a single, broken word. A question. Why? It was the first question they had ever asked. Not a statement of fact, not a command, but a genuine query born of utter confusion. Their entire system of belief had been shattered by the stubborn, illogical love of a single human for his child. Jake looked down at Lily. Her hand was still in his. That was the only answer. He didn't need to say it. The Gleekans could see it. 5:01, 5 o'clock. The lead glycon lowered its arm. The chaotic light in its head slowly, gradually resolved back into a solid, but much dimmer, blue. It turned its body a slow, deliberate movement and glided away from the door. The other Gleekans followed, their movements no longer smooth and confident, but hesitant, troubled. They retreated down the corridor and out of sight. They're leaving, Lily breathed, her voice filled with disbelief. Jake kept his thumb on the button. He didn't trust it. Maria, what's happening? Their ship is undocking. Maria's voice crackled over the comma. They're really leaving. But Jake, the other kids, they're still in the cargo bay. A cold dread washed over Jake. Had they failed? Had they saved themselves only to sacrifice the others? Just then, the doors to cargo bay 3 hissed open on the security monitor Maria was watching. The children, dazed and confused, but seemingly unharmed, began to wander out. The boy who had been processed was with them, blinking, looking around as if waking from a long dream. The Gleekans had let them all go. 3:33:29. Jake, you can stop now, Maria said, her voice thick with relief. The countdown. Stop it. Jake's thumb finally lifted from the button. He hit the ABBA sequence key. The wailing alarm died, plunging the station into an eerie, profound silence. The only sound was their own ragged breathing. It was over. He slumped against the console, his legs giving out. The strength that had held him up for hours drained away, leaving him weak and trembling. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck, and for the first time since it all began, Jake let himself cry. Later, after the station's residents had cautiously emerged, after the children were reunited with their frantic parents, Jake and Lily stood at the main viewport in the hub. With them were Maria, Riggs, and a dozen others. They watched as the impossible, needle-like glycon ship, a wound in the starfield, silently accelerated and vanished into the black. They had not been defeated by weapons or force. They had been defeated by a concept they could not compute. They came to fix humanity's greatest flaw, and instead discovered its greatest, most incomprehensible strength. Lily leaned her head on Jake's shoulder. Do you think they understand now? Jake looked out at the endless expanse of space, where the Gleekans were now heading. Their perfect logic, forever tainted by a new chaotic variable. No, Jake said softly, pulling her closer. I don't think they understand, but they know. They know what it is, and they know to be afraid of it. The universe was still vast and full of things that didn't make sense. But for the first time in a long time, Station Epsilon, his little tin can full of flawed, emotional, inefficient people, finally felt like home.